Farmer Stephanie, and welcome to my Garden of Eden, where I will share with you what I know, sow, and grow when it comes to herbs, veggies, fruit, and more. Today, we're going to talk about what I do in the month of February when it comes to planning out my garden. Back in January, I took an inventory of all of my seeds, and I considered what types of new seeds and plants I might like to grow. I also shared with you that I had started my sweet potato slips, which as you can see here are growing nice and big and tall. And so the first thing that I'm going to do here in February is start actually removing some of these bigger slips from my sweet potatoes and putting them into a jar of water so that they can develop roots of their own. And then a few days after they've developed roots, I can put them in soil and start actually growing them as an individual plant. And so to do that, we just find a nice big tall sweet potato slip. This is a pretty big one here. It's about the length of my hand. And I'm just going to go right to the base where it attaches to the sweet potato. And I'm just going to gently pull it off. And now I have an individual little sweet potato slip. And I'm just going to put it right here in a jar of water. And we'll watch and see, and hopefully in a few weeks, or a few days actually, it will grow roots of its own. And so I'll go ahead and do that with the rest of my taller slips. And then my smaller ones here will have a chance to grow nice and big and tall on their own. And so that's the first thing I'm up to in February, is getting those rooted and potted up so they can absorb nutrients on their own from the soil. The next thing that I'm up to, speaking of putting things in soil, is starting up my seed starting room, or seed starting nook, as it will. It's a corner in the basement, really. And so I'm going to take you down there and show you how I start my seeds and how my setup looks like. But first, I want to tell you 5 reasons why I start my seeds inside. The first and probably most important reason is to extend the growing season length. As I mentioned back in January, there are certain plants that require enough warm days that would be too long to grow here in Michigan. This would be things like peanuts, sweet potatoes, even tomatoes become very close to bordering on the edge of what I could grow here in Michigan if I were to plant the seed directly in the ground. Of course, there are a number of vegetable gardeners around here who go buy their seeds, or their plants, already started at a hardware store or a gardening store, and that's a valuable option as well. I like to start my own seeds and generate my own plants so that I save a little bit of money. A packet of seeds is usually about $2 or $3, and you get anywhere from 10 to 200 seeds depending on the variety of plant that you're growing. And so by starting my own seeds inside, I'm able to save a little bit of money and extend that growing season length so that I can grow plants I otherwise wouldn't be able to if I were to plant them directly in the soil. The second reason I like to start my seeds indoors is to give myself a little bit of a buffer if I have seeds that might not germinate. I tend to keep my seeds in my seed box here for years, and so sometimes germination rates do slow down over the period of months or even years, depending on the seed type. And so if I have some older seeds that I'm not sure if they're going to germinate well, by starting them inside, I can see first if they will germinate, and secondly, how many will germinate, so that I know if I'll have success growing those seeds, or if I need to go out and buy a new packet of seeds if I want to keep growing that variety. The third reason I start my seeds inside is so that I know how many of each plant I will have when it comes time to plant them outdoors. Some seeds you might want to plant in a row or a block, depending on how your garden is set up. And there's nothing more frustrating than having all of the seeds germinate in your nice orderly row except for 1 or 2, and you end up with these holes in what would have otherwise been a nice orderly planting. And so by starting my seeds inside, I know exactly how many plants I'm going to have when it comes time to planning out the spacing in my garden and where I want to put different things. And then I usually do start more plants than I would want to end up planting in the garden. And that way, if some of my plants don't take, if something goes wrong when I transplant them outside in the ground and one dies, unfortunately, I have a reserve of additional plants that I've started from seed that I can just fill in that hole. And so it allows me to have kind of a nice visual aesthetic to my garden, rather than, again, sort of the unpredictable nature of putting the seeds directly in the ground and crossing your fingers that everything comes up. The fourth reason that I like to start seeds indoors is because some of the varieties of plants that I grow, I found in the past that animals tend to dig up the seeds before they have a chance to germinate. This would be things like corn that the birds like to come and eat, peanuts, which the squirrels will come and dig up, or even other bean or flower seeds that various critters in the area will make a tasty treat out of before they can actually grow into a plant. By starting them indoors, I give those plants a chance to grow into a decent sized plant before putting them in the ground. And then there is no seed any longer to be appealing to those critters. And finally, the fifth reason that I start my seeds indoors is because it's something gardening that I can do in the winter. Here in February, just as we talked about in January, it is still very cold outside. This weekend particularly, we are in the midst of a bitter cold weekend, which just might be my least favorite kind of cold. I really can't do anything outside, and so being able to start my seeds inside gives me that sense of gardening and allows me to do something looking forward to the summer months during the cold, dreary days of winter. And so with that, let's go check out my seed starting setup. So this is my seed starting corner of the basement. It's really just a small space that's about 6 feet by 6 feet, and this is where I do all of my seed starting and even growth of many of my plants prior to putting them outdoors. As you can see, I have a few things started. Mostly what I have started so far are things that would be cooler weather plants, so things that can start to go outside maybe in March or April, or seeds that were really kind of old and I just didn't know if they were going to germinate or not. And in fact, a lot I would have expected already should have. And so again, this buys me that buffer if I can go buy new seeds and plant the new seeds and hope that those would come up and not have lost those 2, 3, 4 weeks of my growing season in growing those plants. A lot of people think you need a huge investment to start seeds indoors, and that's not necessarily the case. It really depends on how in-depth you want to go for starting seeds indoors. Many people have much success just starting seeds on a windowsill or near a sunny window. Here in the northern United States, typically that works best with a southern-facing window, and we just don't have a good southern-facing window to do that here in this house. And so I'm going to start my seeds down here in the basement under grow lights, and then when the weather warms up a little bit, I'll start putting them outside during the day and still bringing them back indoors at night when it gets too cold. So when I start my seeds, I have the two necessities that pretty much anybody needs to start seeds indoors is a heat mat and a grow light. Again, you can be successful just in a warm, sunny window, but if you really want to start a seed starting endeavor, you really want a heat mat and a light. These are two things that most seeds need to germinate. The heat mat on the bottom heats the soil, and that's a trigger that springtime is here. It's time to grow. Of course, we're simulating that here. We're tricking them to start growing here in the middle of winter. The grow light, of course, mimics the sun. Many seeds do need light exposure to germinate. Most seed packets will indicate how deeply to sow the seeds, and this is going to be based on a combination of how big the seed is, that is how forcefully, how much energy that seed has that it can force its way up through the soil and germinate, and how much that seed actually needs sunlight to germinate. There are some seeds that will say surface sow, and that means you just put them right on top of the soil. You don't bury them. And that's so that the light can hit that seed. And so I start all my seeds over here on my heat mat under this initial grow light. And then once they germinate, I move them over to this side on my shelving where I have additional grow lights. Now we don't have the heat underneath them, so this is mimicking more of actual springtime sorts of temperatures. It's probably about 60 to 65 degrees down here right now. And so now they're going to start to grow roots and sprout leaves. And then as they grow, I move them up in different pot sizes so that they have room for their roots to expand, and they'll move on to different shelves depending on how tall they are. And so that's a basic overview. Over here I have different supplies that I might need for starting seeds. I have different types of pots, I have buckets, I have gardening gloves, just about anything that I might need I have right here nice and close at hand. So let's next take a closer look at how I might start my seeds. This is the first station of my seed starting setup. This is just a plastic bin of soil in which I'm going to start my seeds. The best soil in which to start seeds is a mix that has been specially formulated for seed germination. It's usually a mixture of peat moss, perlite, and a special fertilizer for young plants. That mixture is best because it will hold the right amount of moisture so that the seeds and the young roots don't rot beneath the surface. You want to hold in just enough moisture, however, that the young plants don't dry out. And the fertilizer is specially formulated for those young roots and young seedlings. However, I tend to go my own way for a number of different reasons, and this is just old potting soil that I had left over for last year. This is not necessarily recommended because this is a soil that was mixed up more for mature plants. There might be fungal spores in here. It might hold too much water and I might have some seed rotting issues. But I forgot to buy seed starting mix the last time I was at the store, and I don't want to make a special trip. And so that's really my logic here today for using this leftover potting soil. Again, I do have that buffer. I'm starting these here in February, which is still pretty early. So if I get to be about 2 or 3 weeks in and my seeds aren't germinating, or they've dampened off, which is a fungal infection of plants, I can go and make my trip to go buy the official seed starting mix and start that way. So this is just old potting soil that I had left over from last year in the garage. I've dampened it. I've added water so that it's picked up some water. That's because I don't want dust from the dirt going all over the place when I start digging in it. And if the dirt or the soil is already moist, I don't need to water my seeds right away and potentially disrupt the location of the seeds. There are many different containers in which you can start your seeds. The most common of which is probably these little plastic containers. There's various sizes and shapes, and these usually are designed to fit perfectly in a black tray. Called a 10-20 tray. Those are the black trays that you've probably seen at stores that come with a plastic dome on them. I have instead these plastic containers that would otherwise be plastic waste, and they have holes already in the bottom. You do want some sort of drainage. You don't want a plastic container that's going to hold all the water in. You want the water to be able to flow through and drain out the bottom so that you don't have sopping wet soil where seeds or roots might rot. You do also want some type of a transparent dome. Again, this is a nice little container, perfect for starting one kind of seed. But again, they do sell the plastic trays and the plastic domes at most gardening stores. This is so that you retain moisture and humidity so that the seeds don't dry out, but yet light can still come through. And so I have these little plastic containers that I have found are kind of perfect for this. How I like to do this is, of course, when I put the dirt in, I don't want the dirt to fall through the holes. And so I'm just going to take a little paper towel that I fold in half, and I put this at the bottom so that the dirt won't fall through. And now I'm going to put about an inch of soil into this container. And then this is just a little measuring spoon that is part of a set that I don't have the whole set of anymore, and I just kind of use that to flatten it out a little bit. I don't want to compact it all the way down because I do want the roots, these young little roots, to be able to push their way through and form a good root system, but I'm just going to kind of flatten it out. There. And then the seeds that I'm going to start today, these are eggplant seeds, Black Beauty. These are pretty old. I've had these for probably 6 or 7 years, and so I'm going to start some of these seeds. So I'm going to plant maybe about 10 of these. I'm going to spread them out. These are big enough so I can actually place them where I want them. And so I am going to just plant them all about maybe an inch apart or so, in half an inch. So I have 10 seeds right there. And now I want to cover these with about 1/4 of an inch of soil. And so I am going to do that. And again, just gently flatten it out. Get just a little bit more. Now I'm going to put my plastic dome on top and put this on my heat pad, which will heat the soil up, and hopefully those seeds will germinate in about 7 to 10 days. It's typically what I expect for eggplant seeds. I have it in this is actually a dome from an old seed starting tray. And that's just so that any water that does run through doesn't just spill out over the table and onto the floor. So let's check out what these might look like when they do germinate. So as we move further down the line on my heat map, these are some seeds that I started about a week and a half ago. These are all various types of pepper plants. And as you can see, they've started to sprout. This one has about 4 or 5. This one has a couple more. And so once they have sprouted or germinated, I leave them for another couple days on the heat mat, just so that they can start to develop some good roots in some nice warmth. Another reason, if we come down here a little bit further, is that some of these seeds still have a little bit of the seed stuck on them. If you can see here, the leaves haven't quite pushed out of the seeds. These are pansies, which would be a cooler weather flower. The leaves have yet to emerge from the seed hull. And so I'm going to leave these here on the heat mat until all of the seeds that have germinated, the leaves have sprouted from the seed shells. And so they will stay here for a few days. Once they've germinated, these are all other types of seeds that I'm waiting to see germination of. And then once they have germinated, the leaves have erupted from the hull of the seed, I move them over to the other side of my seed starting setup. These are just wire shelving that I've purchased, and I've hung some grow lights from some hooks on them. So here I have them all growing underneath the grow lights, and I have them situated so that they're just about 1 inch or 2 from the light. That's so that they don't get too leggy. These little kale seedlings I left on the heat mat a little too long, and they started to grow real tall because they're trying to reach that light. They're trying to get as much light as they can. And so I do like to keep my plants elevated so that they're up nice close to the light, so that they grow nice strong stems instead of growing very tall very quickly and having weak stems. The final stage at this point is once the plants grow their first true leaves, I will move them into their individual pots over here. I've made these pots out of newspaper, and I leave them in these foil trays because they fit a little bit nicer on my wire shelving than the standard black trays. But they each get their own individual little pot. This does take a little bit of practice because you need to separate all of the roots from here. They're all growing in this same container. And so a lot of people prefer to just start each seed in its own individual pot to begin with. And that's a perfectly acceptable way of doing it as well. I mentioned that I'm going to put these in their own pots when they have their first true leaves. These are tomato plants, and when most seeds emerge, they have just these 2 leaves. These are called the cotyledon leaves, and these are the initial seed leaves. These leaves are part of the embryo of the plant in that seed, and they're the first leaves to emerge. And they're what provide the initial nutrient source for generating roots and then producing more leaves. The true leaves, if we look at this one over here, are leaves that are going to look more characteristic of what the actual plant leaves will look like. And so we have a true leaf right down here of my tomato plant. And so we're going to let those true leaves get just a little bit bigger, and then they'll get put in their own pot over in my foil tray. And then, as I mentioned, as they get bigger, they'll get their bigger pots as they grow. And hopefully, by the time late May comes around, they'll be nice and big and strong and ready to put outside. And there you have it, a very brief introduction into how I start my seeds indoors. Again, right now I'm just beginning with some of my older seeds, so I don't expect real great germination on some of these. But hopefully when you come back in March, I'll have all kinds of seedlings all started up, and my shelf here will be nice and full, and we can see how I up-pot those seedlings, either when they first get their true leaves and they go in their initial individual pots, or when I up-pot from a small pot to a bigger one as the plant grows. Other things I do have here in my seed starting setup is I have more lights here. I just haven't hung them yet. And so I'll be able to fill up this whole shelving unit with various lights. I have a squirt bottle, and this is so that I can water these delicate seedlings. If I pour from a watering can or a cup, I run the risk of actually applying so much force to these little seedlings that the stems break, or I over flood the dirt. And so I have a little spray bottle that I use to do my watering. So I give them just a little squirt every now and again. Probably keeping the water to the appropriate amount is one of the most difficult things when starting seeds. Again, you want it to be damp enough that the plants don't dry out, but not so wet that the roots rot under the surface. I have a fan here, as you might have noticed. As I start to fill up this shelving unit with plants, I will turn on the fan from time to time. When these seedlings grow outside, they're subjected to a lot of environmental forces like wind and rain. And so again, those stems need to be nice and strong. Here indoors, they have it kind of nice. There's no wind here. There's nothing that's stressing them. And so I'm going to give them some wind from the fan to help kind of give them an exercise workout and strengthen their stems before they go outside. And so with that, I hope you'll come back in March. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video, and we'll see what my seedlings are doing come March.